I've read all the books, but I can't seem to get it. Or I keep listening and I just can't seem to bring myself to do it. Or when I get really anxious, I just can't bring myself to fully let go. For some members of our community, some members of this audience, there are reasons that the lessons of floating, mindful acceptance, willful tolerance, exposure are just not accessible. Either, if I am anxious at all, I have already failed. The second one is, if I allow myself to fully feel these difficult emotions, well, I'm going to show that, and then that may make emotions or difficult experiences for the other people around me, and that's not allowed. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Anxious Truth Podcast. This is episode 338. We are recording in February of 2026. Actually, we're recording during a blizzard. It's all kinds of fun. Today, we're going to talk about what makes it so hard for some people to access the lessons that we find in recovery, or to even engage with the process at all. There's a million reasons why that might happen, but I want to touch on two of them today, and they may resonate with you. Anyway, I am Drew Linsalata, creator and host of The Anxious Truth. I am a therapist practicing in New York, specializing in the treatment of anxiety and anxiety disorders. I'm also a former sufferer of the very things we talk about in this podcast, and better now, thank you very much. An author, psychoeducator, an advocate, social media dude, and yeah. Now, before we get into that, just a quick reminder that The Anxious Truth is more than just this podcast episode or this video. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube this week, I'm sorry there's no video. Just didn't have time to edit. It's more than just this podcast episode or this video. It is all the 337 other podcast episodes, the books that I've written, the social media content. So much of it is free. In fact, most of it is free. A couple of low-cost workshops that you might be able to access. That's all on my website at theanxioustruth.com. And then there's the Disordered podcast that I do every Friday with Josh Fletcher. He's an anxiety therapist in the UK. That's a great podcast. So if you're not listening to Disordered, check out disordered.fm and you'll find that one there. And if you are enjoying what you hear on The Anxious Truth and you want to be able to talk about what you hear or what you're watching on the YouTube channel, or interact with me a little bit more and interact with people who are also sharing this experience, maybe interact with me and Josh a little more, you can go to disordered.fm and find the community tab. That's where I am hanging out these days to really interact with the audience. You do not have to do that. You are not missing out on something amazing and secret. I promise we would never do that. But if you're interested in a little bit more interaction, head to disordered.fm and check the community tab. So today we're going to talk about the idea that overcoming an anxiety disorder using principles of acceptance as opposed to control, mindful, in the moment acceptance, surfing through the hardest parts of the experience, the peak of the experience. We're using principles of facing and tolerating and floating, and we're using exposure. That is a hard ask for every anxious person. If you're listening to this podcast and you are hoping to be able to use these type of strategies, which we know have really good outcomes in general, they're far better than like control-based strategies. Know that this is not easy, right? Everybody struggles with this primarily because nobody wants to intentionally do scary things. If you are feeling really anxious, if you are panicking, if your OCD is screaming at you that there's some horrible fate that awaits you, if you do not compulse, it is really hard to not follow those instructions. So that's a universal thing. Nobody rolls into this podcast, hears me say these things or read one of my books, and then just runs out and just starts completely dropping all of their resistance and totally accepting and allowing and floating perfectly, and then 2 weeks later, they're all good. It doesn't happen that way. It's hard enough as it is. But for some members of our community, some members of this audience, there are reasons, real, actual reasons, usually based on background or experience, that the lessons of floating, mindful acceptance, willful tolerance, exposure, all of those things are just not accessible, or they're not readily accessible. It's even harder, not just because this is scary work or demanding work, but because there are other issues that come into it that kind of stand in the way of fully either embracing this, sort of mindful acceptance strategy or actually doing the strategy. And I want to talk about two of those today. Now, you guys maybe have heard me say on this podcast, or we talk about this on Disordered. You've probably heard me say it over and over in social media circles. There's a limit to how much somebody can help you, somebody like me, in a podcast or a YouTube video or a social media post, because we just don't know you. Like I would love to know you all, but I'm never going to know you all. And since I don't know you individually, I cannot know why you might be stuck with, like, I've read all the books, but I can't seem to get it. Or I keep listening and I just can't seem to bring myself to do it. Or when I get really anxious, I just can't bring myself to fully let go. I would love to be able to interact with all 100,000 of you and kind of work through that individually. But the key point would be individually. So one of the things that I can tell you as a working therapist that specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders is my practice is full of people who listen to this podcast or listen to Disordered, have read the books that I've written. And when we get to work one-on-one, invariably in almost every case, we have to try to figure out what is stopping them or preventing them or making it more difficult for them to actually implement the strategies that we talk about here. Now, I've also said many, many times that this is a relatively simple plan. It's just really hard to execute. So aside from being counterintuitive or sort of against, air quotes, common sense or just scary to do this kind of work, sometimes we find one of two principles. That would be either if I am anxious at all, I have already failed, right? If I am anxious at all, I have already failed. And the second problem, which is very common, and again, there's a zillion problems that may come into this that will, present obstacles in improvement and recovery. The second one is if I allow myself to fully feel these difficult emotions, well, I'm going to show that, and then that may make emotions or difficult experiences for the other people around me, and that's not allowed, right? So the two primary or most common obstacles that we have to work on when I work with somebody in therapy are those two. Either the minute I get anxious, I've already failed. So there's no lesson to learn because I'm a failure. I shouldn't feel this way. This is not correct. Or I want to do acceptance, floating, allowance, allowing willful tolerance, but then I'm going to really feel the full thing. And then I might show that. And if I get anxious, then I'm going to ruin everybody else's day or make bad emotions in them. And that's not allowed. Those two things are difficult, right? I'm not sure which one resonates more with you. And there are, like I said, a zillion other reasons. I couldn't possibly list all of the other issues, but in my experience, these are the two. These are the two that come to the forefront. So the person who is following along on social media or reading books or listening to podcasts can't seem to get it. Often it takes us some time to get to that point. So let's talk about the first one. The first one would be, you don't understand. Like, yes, I'm going to go do the things. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do exposures. I'm going to float. I'm going to willfully tolerate. I'm going to accept. But who cares? Because the fact that I even had to do those things because I am anxious to begin with means that I am already failing. It's too late. There are no lessons to learn. The fact that I made it through the meeting or that I did the kid school drop off or that I was, my OCD was screaming at me and I didn't do my compulsions, it doesn't matter anyway. Like, what's the difference? There's no lesson in that because just the fact that I was in that state to begin with is a failure. It's unacceptable. It should never happen. And for many people, they will see it or tie it to other defects. So either the fact that I have this problem or developed this problem to begin with, it means I am defective. That's a problem. I am a problem just because I have this problem. Very, very self-critical. Disordered, we talk about Craig the Critic. We talk a lot about self-compassion, and I talk about it here too. It's very important. That is a harsh, negative, critical self-image or the way you see yourself. Since I am an anxious person, I am failing. Or I am a failure, or I am broken, or that should have never happened. And if we can't even get into the experience part of experiential learning, because the minute you have to, do it, #do it anyway, the minute you have to do that, you've already failed. So there's no lesson to access. Nope. Don't tell me about lessons, Drew, because I shouldn't have to do this to begin with. We're going to have a problem. Right? It becomes very, very difficult. And that's one of the most common reasons why people, maybe in my social media audience or listeners to the podcast will say, I don't understand. I just can't seem to do what you say. This is a big one, right? Because you may not even be necessarily aware of it. Like, isn't it a failure? I know many, many people will say like, oh, wait, that's not a failure. You mean I'm not defective, or it's not proof of some sort of defect because I feel this way? It's outside of the realm of your experience that you could actually be kind to yourself because you are an anxious person or have an anxiety disorder right now. Like, yeah, it is actually possible that doesn't mean you're awful or failing or a terrible mom or a terrible husband or a terrible friend or an awful employee or a bad leader. These are the things that people will connect to that. So just to, expand on that just a little bit, the things that I will often hear is either the state of the anxiety disorder itself is a defect that is not to be allowed. That is not correct. No one should be like that. Or maybe not, but also the fact that I am anxious and therefore will struggle and have to do an exposure. If I take my kids to the movies, the fact that that's even a challenge for me means that I am a bad person, or I am a bad mother. I am a bad dad. I am a terrible parent. I am a bad friend. I am a terrible partner. I'm a bad husband or wife or spouse or whatever. I'm a bad sibling. So it depends. Either you may see the anxiety itself as a structural defect that you should never allow, or the fact that you have that might necessarily be the anxiety isn't the defect, but it certainly highlights the fact that I'm a piece of crap. And I hate when people say that, but it is something that I hear in my therapy practice all the time. And when you're able to maybe talk a little bit in more depth with people who are in the podcast audience, you start to hear that sort of stuff. So really, like in the Disordered podcast community I was talking about before, again, totally optional. I'm not here to like dangle that. You don't have to go join that to get like a special fix for your anxiety. But there was a really great discussion about that went on this past weekend that prompted this episode. People were really great. They were sharing openly about that and really very clearly talked about how, no, you don't understand. This is a problem. So that's a tough one. If the fact that you have to do exposures or face or accept or float or whatever you want to call it, just the fact that you even have to do that is a failure before you even start, you are going to have a really difficult time understanding that did it anyway means anything at all. So we often see it too among people who say, well, I did it anyway, but I don't feel anything about that. Like I just can't seem to access like, hey, yay, I did it. I did a scary thing because I'm not supposed to have to do scary things. So something to chew on. I'm going to bring it back around to how we might, work on those things if I was your therapist. But for a second, I really want to touch on the second major obstacle. The second major obstacle is if I fully let go, that like I hear these crazy guys with microphones talking about, I have to fully let go, fully allow, fully accept, willfully tolerate, even the peak of the discomfort and the screaming and the OCD is blazing in my head and the panic is raging. And like, I gotta fully let go and allow that. My impairment in that moment, and we might call it an impairment because while you're not debilitated, we can't call that debilitated, but we can certainly call it impaired or impacted. If I am impacted and I am showing any sign of distress, or I am anxious, or I am not performing up to like the optimal that I think I'm supposed to be, or other people think I'm supposed to be, then I'm going to make some pretty bad feelings in the people around me. And that is not allowed. See the difference? This is not necessarily my anxiety makes me defective, although those two things may go together. It may be I'm not allowed to fully panic. I'm not allowed to be fully afraid. I'm not allowed to cry when I'm upset. I'm not allowed to need a hug, because if I'm not feeling good, then that might make the person in the room with me not feel good. And that's not okay. Now, there's a million different reasons why you may be listening to that. And if you're like, yes, that's me. I couldn't even begin to guess how you got there. It tends to be cultural, family dynamics, background. And this is where, when you hear people like me say, yes, we sound like engineers and mechanics because we're giving you these very dry mechanical principles of face the fear, learn the lesson, face the fear, learn the lesson, start to change what you think about your anxiety, and you get better. Correct, simple plan, hard to execute because it's scary and counterintuitive, but also this, right? So while we don't, in anxiety disorders, we don't look at like, oh, well, your childhood made the anxiety disorder. Your parents were so domineering or whatever. I'm making stuff up here that like, oh, that's why you have an anxiety disorder. Well, maybe you contributed. You're right. But we're still going to lean on the principle that once you are afraid of the state itself, the state of anxiety itself is the problem, which is the case in any anxiety disorder, OCD, which is adjacent, might as well be an anxiety disorder in my book. Once you get to that point, we have to rely on the principles that we talk about here. But this is the part where your background, your past, your childhood, the culture you're in, your experiences, this is the part where it enters the chat, right? Like, so you as an individual, your life experiences now enter the chat. And sometimes they enter the chat with this belief. My anxiety might ruin your day, and I'm not allowed to ruin your day. Sometimes it's because you were taught as a child to shut up. You have nothing to be anxious about. Stop crying. You are ruining my day. There are instances where we grow up and we learn that we have to really control all of our emotions. We're not allowed to be either extra happy or sad or distressed. We have to be neutral. Otherwise, maybe we'll trigger one or both of our parents or our caregivers, and then that's not good. There's a price to pay for that. So you may have learned fully letting go and completely, fully allowing all of my internal experiences is not allowed. That is not safe. I'm going to be punished for that, because I'm going to ruin someone else's day. Maybe you learned that when you were 6, maybe you learned it when you were 18, maybe you learned it when you were 25, but you may be carrying that lesson. As one example, can you see how if you have one of these two beliefs that you bring into this process, either there is a structural defect or a personality or a moral or a character defect that my anxiety either represents or highlights, or I can't allow myself to fully allow, accept, float, tolerate, because then I might ruin someone else's day, and that's not safe or allowed. It makes me a terrible person. Why are you making me feel so bad? I've heard that. Heartbreaking stories, right? Can you see how these two themes, which are based on past experiences, culture, what you've gone through in your life, the people you've been around, their social themes here. Can you see how these beliefs would make it really hard for you to read a book like The Anxious Truth, or, listen to Disorder, that podcast, and say, oh yeah, I'll just do these things and I'll learn lessons and I'll be better. Nope. Can't learn the lesson, because cannot do that to begin with, either because I'm already failing, or because nope, being fully anxious and doing an exposure, and maybe it means I shed a tear, or maybe somebody can see me shaking, or they'll see me breathing heavy, or they'll see me like really in maybe a state of distress. Oh, that's not okay, because I have to manage their emotions, and then that's not allowed. And then where does that put you if you bring both of these beliefs, one or both of these belief themes, into this process of anxiety recovery or desensitization? It leaves you stuck completely in the control strategy side of this equation. And if you've ever heard anything I've said on this podcast in 337 episodes over 10 years, or on Disordered with Josh, or any book that I've ever written, or anything I've ever said on social media, you will probably know by now, I am never talking about how to control your anxiety, your internal experiences, your emotions, ever. I am not a control strategy guy. I am a mindful acceptance strategy guy, and I have been since day one. Now, you may decide that that's not for you, and if this is the first time you've ever heard this podcast, and maybe we're not going to see eye to eye, and that's okay. Everybody gets to pick the path they want. But if you have been trying control strategies for years or many years and cannot seem to make any progress, and you're stuck in a highly restricted, highly ritualized life that doesn't look anything like the life that you want, because you are trying to keep tight control over how you feel, you might be done with that. I want to do it this other way, but I can't do it that other way because it violates these beliefs and these rules that I bring into the process with me. So I'm stuck in control, but I can't get control, and that's not really working for me. If you feel like you're struggling and I just can't get it, I can't bring myself to do it. If you can't bring yourself to do it, or you can't get it, because either you think that you're not supposed to be anxious in the first place, it itself is a problem or a defect, or it highlights your other flaws or defects or deficiencies that you see in yourself when you look in the mirror, or doing this would ruin someone else's day and I have to manage everybody else's happiness and emotions, so I can't allow myself to feel my own, you're cooked, right? Like that's the saying now in 2026, we're cooked, everybody. Sometimes this is the issue. Folks then kind of wander into my therapy practice, and I get the privilege of getting to know them as actual human beings, individuals, spend time with them every week. Like that's that intimate relationship when you get a therapist and a client, while all of a sudden this stuff starts coming out. And I think, as I mentioned before, what's particularly insidious about these two particular, set of rules or beliefs that you bring into this is that they're almost invisible. It's very rare that somebody comes in and says, well, here's the deal. I've been anxious for many, many years, or I've been struggling with OCD for many, many years, and I can't seem to move forward. And it's because I see myself as broken or less than. That would be much easier. They often cannot see that, or they don't even understand that having to manage other people's emotions by keeping yours under wraps is not normal. They don't even know that because that's the environment that maybe they grew up in or they're existing in. That just seems like they're normal. So they don't even think to bring that up. It only comes out as we work together over time. So what do we do about that? That's always the $1 million question, right? I would love to be able to say, here's 3 magic tips in this podcast that will fix and change those beliefs. I would love to just tell you like, oh, don't even care about other people's emotions. Just step into your power. It doesn't matter. Like, don't give a shit what anybody else thinks. It's not that easy. It's just not that easy. If you decide, and if you can uncover that, like, oh yeah, I can kind of see what this guy is saying makes sense. You got some work in front of you, and it's not necessarily easy work, because in the end, if you see yourself as defective in some way, either the anxiety state itself represents a defect, or it highlights a bunch of other defects or deficiencies that you feel like you see in yourself, you got to start acting as if you don't have those deficiencies, which feels wrong. Now, maybe it doesn't feel dangerous like facing OCD or panic might, in the very exact same way, but you start to challenge those old beliefs about yourself and maybe those old rules or norms that come with you, that maybe you're based in your family dynamic, your family culture, your social groups. Like, disobeying those rules and those norms to kind of dismantle those negative self-beliefs is really hard work, because it feels like you're making a giant mistake. It feels like you are faking it. You're lying to yourself. I'm not being authentic. I can sit here for probably 15 minutes and just spew like phrases that people would say. Because, what we're going to really kind of land on a little bit is you're going to have to be nice to yourself and recognize that you arrived in those 2 sort of belief systems or rule systems. You were dropped into those, right? You didn't make those. It's not your fault that you were taught that you're defective or deficient or less than. It's not your fault. So you're going to have to be okay with the fact that, like, hey, I was dropped into this situation. Now I'm going to have to do the whole, like, feel like I'm broken, act like I'm not. Feel like I'm the worst, act like I'm not. Feel like I'm ruining everything, act like I'm not. So if you look at it as the parallel to like what looks like an anxiety or an OCD exposure would look like, feel like I'm actually doomed, act like I'm not. Feel this way, act a different way is a big ask for any human being. Anxiety disorders and chronic anxiety is a big ask already, because feel like I'm doomed, act like I'm not requires a courageous, informed leap of faith every time. Hard enough for everybody. But now you also have to add, feel like I'm defective or deficient, act like I'm not. Feel like I'm ruining everybody's day, act like I'm not. So these are really hard combination. And sometimes people will say, oh, but I heard that this is short duration therapy. And usually this isn't like, I don't have to lay on a sofa and talk to a therapist for years and years and years. Yeah, but you're not just an anxiety disorder with legs. I make that joke all the time. You bring these other things into the process, and sometimes it takes a while to work through those. So if I can leave you with anything today, I can describe these things. So hopefully you can feel like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not actually broken. Oh yeah, that's me. Sometimes all I can do is shine a light so that it's not just you. You're in, unfortunately, good company with many other human beings who are lovely human beings who share the same problems that you do. But in the end, it just might take a while to work on these things. It may take a while, but it's not impossible. And this is where we can't just always rely on everything is an exposure thing. Everything is avoidance. Everything is acceptance. Everything is mindfulness. Well, yeah, those principles come with us every day when we're dealing with an anxiety disorder, but not everything that has you pinned down is an exposure, right? A problem or a mindfulness problem. A little bit mindfulness, because we have to recognize like, oh yeah, there's that old belief coming out there's that old belief coming out that tells me to criticize myself. There's that old belief coming out that tells me I have to manage that person's emotions by controlling my own. You got to be able to see it. So there's some mindfulness there, but these are sticky things. These are not necessarily mechanical things. These are emotional things. And while, we don't treat anxiety disorders by just having talk therapy for 3 years, as you probably know, if you've tried that, sometimes we got to do some talking, and that's okay. Sometimes you may have to combine treatments or modalities. Like, that's okay. That happens. That's actually quite normal. So one of the interesting things that I wasn't expecting when I went into therapy practice is people would come into the practice and, of course they come to me because they want to work on an anxiety disorder, and that's what I'm there for. That's great. That's my specialty. But I would not expect to only ever talk about anxiety and exposures, yet my clients will often, and everybody's so nice, they'll be like, Am I allowed to talk about something else? Like, of course you are. Of course you are. Like, I'm here for everything. Like, we're going to talk about everything here. So while I can't do that in a podcast or the comment section on YouTube, I can't even do it if you're in the Disordered podcast community. You know, I can interact a little more, but we still can't do it there. That's a very intimate type relationship. It's okay to have to expand your scope a little bit and take these things into account. Like, it's really important. You got to make room for all of the things that you have to work on. And sometimes you are, against your will and without asking for it, handed a set of rules or personal beliefs or self-image that stand in the way of doing this kind of work. And these are the two most common things that I see. Either I am defective or less than because of anxiety, or the anxiety just shows that, or my anxiety is going to ruin someone else's day. I got to make sure everybody else is happy, taken care of, and I got to make sure that their emotions are okay. So there's no way I can ever work on my own. Not cool. Both of those things, not cool. And if you're struggling with those things, I'm really sorry. Like, however way you got there, it's not cool and it's not your fault. So the best I could do is to at least help you become maybe more aware of those things and know that, like, it's okay to have to address those things too. Like, not everything is just going to be a mechanical avoidance, mindful acceptance, exposure. Like, it can't be. Not everything is like that in life. So if you've been stuck and you feel like you cannot seem to move forward, no matter how many times you listen to me talking to this expensive microphone, it's okay. Like, when I say everybody gets there for their own reasons in their own time, I'm talking about this stuff. It may take you a while to work through some of these issues that let you consistently take courageous leaps of faith and use floating, facing, surrender, willful tolerance and exposures to learn your lessons. And if it takes a little longer because you got to work on some other stuff, that's okay. That is totally okay. You have value no matter what situation you're in. You always have intrinsic value as a human being. Don't ever forget that, right? So at the 28-minute mark, I think I'm going to wrap it up. That was a little bit more rambling than I thought, but I should probably stop saying that. I make a joke about it all the time, right? But again, hopefully you got something out of this today, and maybe you recognize these things in yourself. Maybe you can understand that you're not alone in this. Maybe you can have a little hope that you can actually work on these things, and it doesn't mean you're screwed. You're not doomed. You're not going to be anxious forever because of this. You just might have to work on some other stuff. So as we wrap up, I'll ask you the same favors that I always do. If you got something out of this, if you're watching, not that there's anything to watch on YouTube this week, maybe like the video, maybe subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell. If you like consuming on YouTube, then, you know, use those tools. Little clicks for you, they mean a lot to me. So they kind of tell YouTube to not bury me in the endless algorithm. And of course, if you're listening to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some platform that lets you leave a rating or a review, a 5-star rating is always appreciated if you think I've earned it. And maybe a short 1 or 2 line or paragraph review of why you like the podcast is also helpful too, because it helps other people find the podcast and other people get to access things that may be helpful. And that makes me feel good. Anyway, that is episode 338 of The Anxious Truth in the Books. Today, we talked about some things that aren't just being brave. There's an element of being brave in all of this, even the stuff I talked about today. But if you can at least be aware of some of these limiting beliefs or these negative beliefs that have been sort of handed to you by your culture, your family, your background, your experiences against your will, and now you got to work on them. If you could at least see that, recognize that in yourself today, if that is in fact a problem, then you are winning. If you can be aware, you can actually start to work on it. So don't minimize that, right? I'll be back in another 2 weeks with another podcast topic. Don't know what it is, but I'll be here. Thanks for hanging out today, and I will see you in the next one.